Many players consider Bobby Fischer to be the greatest chess player of all times. He was the youngest grandmaster of his time, the 8 times USA chess champion, and the 11th world champion. In this course, we will talk about Fischer's games, and we will not only enjoy the beauty of his games, but we'll also learn the techniques that Fischer used in his games, so that you can learn and imitate his style and improve your own performance. Well, of course, it is a difficult task to play exactly like Fischer, because you might need to dedicate your full life to chess, which most people would not do. But anyway, even if you imitate some of the techniques and style of Bobby Fischer, you will definitely be able to improve your chess performance and gain 1 or 2 extra 100 rating points, which will be a nice result by itself. I am Igor Smirnov, international grandmaster and chess coach from the Remote Chess Academy, and it will be my pleasure to make my best to help you improve your chess while have a great time observing Fischer's games. Okay, let's come back to the course's title and the main question: how to play like Bobby Fischer. Some people say that he simply had that natural talent for chess, that he was a chess genius. Well, let's check what Fischer himself said about this topic. Here is a quote from Fischer: "I object to being called a chess genius because I consider myself to be an all-around genius who just happens to play chess." Well, I love this way of self-perception. Definitely the guy didn't suffer for lack of self-confidence. Anyhow, if we are not geniuses, we would have to analyze his games more seriously and methodically and find the keys to success in something more practical. I analyzed a lot of games played by Fischer, and I realized what is the main strength of himself. And that is the positional play. Because different players have different style of playing. For instance, in this photo on the right side you can see Mikhail Tal, also one of the former world champions, who was a master of attack and combinations, and he was great in complicating positions and getting some sudden moves into play and winning fantastical games. On the contrary, if we look at the games of Bobby Fischer, we would see a totally different picture. His game is very methodical. He was building up the positions step by step, he was putting his pieces on the best positions, and ultimately he reached the total domination where the opponent was totally defenseless. So the positional play was the main strength of Bobby Fischer, and it was something that he did really well. That is why the title of this first lesson is Bobby Fischer Positional Play at its Best. Now, to learn to play positional play at a high level, let's first figure out what the positional play is. How would you answer this question? What do you think? What is a positional play? I googled this question and I found plenty of different answers, starting from something that positional play is what Nimzowitsch described in his book My System, and oftentimes people refer to that just strategy or some general things. Some just started to name different elements of the position, such as open line, center, and initiative, etc. But I have the feeling that most players just don't have this clear understanding of what the positional play is. It was summarized very well by one of the famous players of the past, Savely Tartakover, who said the following: "Tactics is what you do when there is something to do, and strategy is what you do when there is nothing to do." I think it's quite a neat explanation of what most people feel when it comes to strategy or positional play. And I can understand it easily, because when it comes to tactics, this is something pretty straightforward. For instance, if we have a look at the tactical motif called fork, there is a white knight which double attacks 2 opponent's pieces simultaneously, and that is called fork. Everything is pretty straightforward and we can comprehend it easily. But when it comes to positional play, well, this is something vague and intricate. Okay, what is positional play? I can give you a very simple explanation which you will remember for the rest of your life without any effort. The answer to the question of what a positional play is actually already included into the term itself. It is all about the position. It is about putting your pieces on the right positions. To summarize, positional play is the art of putting your forces on the most favorable positions. Again, you play moves that put your pieces on the best positions. And that is called positional play. Now, why is it important to put your pieces on important positions, on the right positions? It is because when your forces are standing properly, they are controlling the large amount of territory. And when you keep doing this, you keep increasing the territory under your control until the time that ultimately you control the majority of the chessboard and therefore you reach total domination. I think it could be even easier to understand this thing if we take an analogy from the real life, because we know that chess is a model of war. So we can imagine the situation of a military conflict between a few different parties where different forces control certain areas. So here's a map from real life, even though it is about 800 years old, about the Mongol Empire. And here by different colors you can see the territory marked out under the control of different forces. So you can see that there is a green territory under control of some forces, and there is a yellow territory and some other territories as well. So what is the goal of each party of this competition, of this conflict? Well, the goal obviously is to control this whole territory. Ultimately, this is what they want to achieve. Another question is, what does it mean to control the territory? Does it mean that your military forces are standing throughout this whole territory? Well, of course not. They are presented in some locations, and the other locations they are not presented physically, but they can easily attack this territory. Or if we talk about the modern world, then maybe your forces can bombard this territory. So even though your forces are not standing there, but they can easily target this territory and attack it, making it impossible for anyone else to come into this territory and stand there. Now let's come back to chess and see how the same idea works there. Let's have a look at this position. This is a game between Fischer playing white and Bidak playing black. How would you evaluate it here? Which territory is under the control of black and which territory is under the control of white? Well, of course, it is a bit difficult to say it very specifically because there are too many pieces standing here and there, but at least you can make a relative comparison and say roughly which territory is controlled by the pieces, meaning that either the pieces are physically standing on some squares or they are attacking, they are controlling some squares. If we talk about black, I would say that black controls the last three ranks, because almost all of his pieces are standing there and he controls the squares there. Even though there are like this pawn on h4 and this bishop on c3, which is located on the white's territory, but these are individual pieces which doesn't attack anything, doesn't make any damage to white, and doesn't do anything at all. So overall, roughly, I would say that black controls the last three ranks. Now let's think about the white position and which is the territory under the control of the white species. I'd say that white controls almost the entire board with the exception of the last rank. Thanks to white's rook on d7, white puts pressure along the 7th rank, and the other of the white species, the rest of his species, controls most of the other squares on the chessboard. Of course, under these circumstances, we can easily conclude that white should be winning in this position because he's so much dominative, he's controlling almost the entire chessboard. Pay attention to a few interesting aspects of this position. The aspect number one is that even though materially both sides are equal, but white's position is so much better that in fact it is winning. For instance, let's compare the white's rook on d1 and the black's rook on b8. Theoretically, these are the same pieces with the same power, but in reality, you can look at this b8 rook locked there in the corner. It has only one square where it may go theoretically, but it's totally useless, and in reality it can't move at all because otherwise the b7 pawn will be captured. And if you look at the white's rook on d1, it can go wherever it wants and it can do a lot of different stuff. It controls so much more squares when compared to the black's rook on b8. And that is the conclusion number one. While putting your pieces on favorable position, you can make them much more powerful than an equal opponent's counterpart. There is also another interesting moment here. While improving the position of your pieces, you start attacking automatically. Let me show you what I mean by taking a few moves backward. Okay, so I make a few moves back. So the position was like this. And at this point, white played bishop to f3. So therefore, white improved the position of his bishop because on the e2 it was restricted by his own c4 pawn, and while putting the bishop on f3, it started to attack along this long diagonal. Then black played bishop c3 and white placed the rook on the 7th rank. Now think about this. White did not plan any particular attack. And even right now, white is not attacking anything like directly. White is not going to capture anything on the next move. White was simply putting his pieces on slightly more active positions. And at the same time, he started to control larger amount of territory of the chessboard, and some of the black's pieces appeared under fire. So that's the great thing about positional play and putting your pieces on better positions. At some point, opponent's pawns and pieces appear under the fire of your forces automatically without even you doing anything, particularly for this reason of attack. And right now, if we just summarize what can happen in this game later on, you can see that black is absolutely restricted. There is almost nothing he can do. Like the rooks are restricted on the last rank, and well, they can move somewhere, but it wouldn't change anything. The black's knight cannot go anywhere because the b7 pawn will be lost, and the black's bishop can move somewhere, but it won't change anything either. In the actual game, black tried his last chance. He made that double attack with the move knight to e5, with the double attack of white's rook and bishop, but white simply ignored this threat and he captured the pawn, because even though white is sacrificing the exchange, he still saves this total domination. Currently black's rook is under attack, and after the rook was removed, white simply started to push his pawn forward, and now the white's plan is pretty simple. It's just to advance this pawn forward, hoping to win black's rook for this pawn. Now let me make a couple more moves. So black played a5, c6, e5, bishop a7, and then c7, and black is defenseless. White is gonna play bishop b6 and then rook d8, and the pawn on c7, this critical pawn, will be promoted, or black would have to give up the rook for it. And therefore white won this game in a couple of next moves. Conclusion. Put your forces on the most favorable positions. That is the single most important guideline idea that Fischer followed in his games. And that is why he was a master of positional play. By every move he played, he was thinking of how to improve the position of his pieces, how to place them on a slightly more active, better positions. And while doing this methodically, he came to the situation where he was totally dominating and the opponent had nothing to do and he had no defense and he was absolutely losing. Okay, so of course this is a general idea, and in the next lessons we will talk about it in a more specific terms, and what are those right squares and how should you move your pieces there, and all the other details. So I'm waiting for you in the following lessons where we will learn a couple of other very interesting techniques used by Bobby Fischer so that you can implement them in your game and become a great chess player. I'm waiting for you in the following lessons. Thanks for your attention.